I never meant to fall for her. But the way she carried her pain, with grace, with fire, made it impossible not to. I still remember the first time I saw her. Not because she was strikingly beautiful, though she was, but because the room shifted when she walked in. It wasn't the kind of entrance that demanded attention. It was quieter than that. The kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself, because it already belonged. It was a gray Tuesday morning, the air damp with drizzle. I'd been standing near the window of the community hall, nursing a cup of cheap coffee, trying to look like I belonged there too. That's when she came in, confident, calm, a stack of folders in her arms and that subtle look of focus people get when they've already handled a dozen things before 9 a.m. Her name was Mara. Everyone else seemed to straighten when she spoke. She didn't raise her voice, yet people listened. There was something deliberate about the way she moved, measured, graceful, almost restrained. Her tone carried warmth, but there was a firmness beneath it, like she'd learned long ago how to be gentle without ever being dismissed. I caught myself studying her more than I should have. The faint streaks of silver in her dark hair, the lines near her eyes that deepened when she smiled, signs of a life that had seen both light and weight. She wasn't trying to hide any of it. If anything, it made her presence stronger. At first, I told myself it was simple admiration. Respect. Maybe curiosity. She carried an energy I didn't see often in people my age, a sense of having lived, of having fought through storms and learned how to stand tall afterward. There was no pretense in her, no need to impress. And maybe that's what caught me off guard. She asked me a question at one point, something small about logistics, and I remember stumbling over my words. Her eyes softened when she smiled, not mocking, just patient. "Don't worry," she said lightly, "you'll get used to how chaotic it gets here." Then she turned away, already moving toward another conversation, already commanding the space without meaning to. But for me, that brief exchange lingered. I remember the scent of rain that clung to her scarf, the sound of her bracelets when she shifted papers, the calm rhythm in her speech. Even after she left the room, that energy stayed behind, like warmth after sunlight moves on. That evening, I couldn't explain why I kept thinking about her. It wasn't attraction in the usual sense, not yet. It was something subtler. I wanted to understand her. To know what built that kind of quiet strength. I didn't plan for her to matter. But even then, before I knew what was coming, a small part of me understood. Sometimes you don't choose the people who pull you in. Sometimes, they walk into a gray Tuesday morning, and without saying a word, they change the color of it. Our conversations began the way most do, brief, polite, functional. She was always moving, always doing something, but she made a habit of pausing when she spoke to people, like she believed every exchange deserved her full attention. That simple act, of listening, made me slow down too. It started with small things. I'd ask how she managed to stay so calm during the endless chaos of the project, or she'd tease me about the way I took notes like I was still in college. She laughed easily, not loudly, but with that soft, genuine tone that made it impossible not to smile back. Every word she spoke seemed to carry a little bit of her world, layered, thoughtful, real. One afternoon, we ended up sitting near each other after a long day of planning. Everyone else had left the hall, leaving behind half-empty cups and the fading hum of fluorescent lights. She was reviewing papers, I was pretending to check emails but mostly watching her. Finally, I said, "You ever get tired of being the one who keeps everything running?" She looked up, amused, then thoughtful. "Every day," she said. "But if I stop, everything falls apart." That honesty caught me off guard. She didn't hide behind a joke or brush it off. She just said it, matter-of-factly, and went back to her work. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. So I asked, "Then why keep doing it?" She paused again. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy in a good way, like she was deciding whether to let me in a little further. "Because someone has to," she said quietly. And because I've learned that strength doesn't come from not feeling tired. It comes from showing up even when you are. That line stayed with me. Strength doesn't come from not feeling tired. I remember watching the light hit her face as she said it, the faint shadows beneath her eyes, the way her shoulders relaxed only when she exhaled. She didn't look invincible. She looked human, and somehow that made her strength even more real. After that day, our conversations became longer. Sometimes they drifted toward books, music, old films. Other times, we talked about nothing at all, just shared quiet moments while she organized papers and I pretended to help. There was always an ease between us, a rhythm that didn't need filling with noise. I began to notice things I hadn't before, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking, how her laughter seemed to carry warmth even when her eyes looked tired. I started looking forward to those small exchanges, to hearing what she'd say next, to feeling the calm she brought into every room. I told myself it was just admiration. That I liked how grounded she was, how sure. But deep down, I already knew it was more. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she made me feel when she said it. Like I was being seen, not for who I was trying to be, but for who I actually was. And that realization, that quiet, growing pull, was the beginning of everything that followed. It was easy to mistake her composure for ease. On the surface, Mara always seemed in control, steady voice, patient tone, eyes that met yours without flinching. But the more time I spent around her, the more I began to see what lay behind that calm. Strength, yes, but strength that came at a cost. It happened one evening after most people had gone home. The community hall was nearly empty, the last of the sunlight painting soft amber lines across the floor. She was still there, surrounded by scattered documents and the hum of the old ceiling fan. I hesitated before walking in, not wanting to intrude, but something in her posture, shoulders slightly hunched, head bowed over her phone, made me stop pretending not to notice. "You should head home," I said gently. "You've been here since morning." She gave a faint smile without looking up. "If I leave, it'll all be here waiting for me tomorrow." There was weariness in her voice that I hadn't heard before. Not just physical tiredness, but the kind that sits deep in the bones, years of carrying things alone. I sat across from her, pretending to review notes. After a moment, she sighed and set her phone down. "My sister called," she said softly. "She's worried about Mom again. Hospital bills, medication, the usual." Her tone was steady, but her fingers fidgeted with her ring. I'd never seen her do that before. "You handle so much," I said quietly. "Don't you ever want to stop?" She looked at me then, really looked. The kind of gaze that stripped away pretense. "Of course I do. But life doesn't pause just because you're tired. You just find ways to keep standing." The words lingered between us. There was no bitterness in them, only truth. She wasn't looking for sympathy, she was simply stating what was. And somehow, that honesty made her seem even more powerful. A silence settled between us, not awkward but intimate. I could hear the faint rustle of papers, the ticking of the wall clock. The world felt small in that moment, just the two of us and the low hum of her resilience. I wanted to tell her that she didn't always have to be strong. That it was okay to fall apart sometimes. But I didn't. Instead, I reached out and moved the cup of tea closer to her hand. Our fingers brushed, barely a touch, but it was enough to make her pause. She met my eyes again, softer this time. "Thank you," she said quietly. It was such a simple moment, nothing dramatic, nothing spoken outright, but something shifted. I began to see her differently. Not as the unshakable woman everyone admired, but as someone who carried pain so gracefully that no one thought to ask if it was heavy. That night, as I walked home, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head, the tremor in her voice, the faint crack in her armor. Her strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about breaking silently, and still showing up anyway. And that realization hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't just drawn to her confidence anymore. I was drawn to her humanity. There wasn't a grand confession, no dramatic spark or carefully planned moment. It happened quietly, like most things between us did. Subtle, unintentional, and yet it changed everything. It was raining that evening, the kind that blurs the edges of the world and makes time slow down. We had stayed behind after everyone left, finalizing reports for the upcoming event. The hall smelled faintly of paper, wet earth, and the faint citrus of her perfume. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the windows, soft and hypnotic. She looked tired again, but not in the way I'd seen before. It wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was emotional. Her usual steadiness was replaced by a quiet fragility. She sat at the table, rubbing her temples, eyes closed. I hesitated, then said, "You should take a break. You've done more than enough." Her voice came out low, weary. "I can't afford to stop, not now." Something about the way she said it made me move closer. I sat across from her, searching her face for the strength that always seemed unshakable. It was still there, but dimmer now, like a candle burning too long. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain filled the silence between us. Then, unexpectedly, she began to talk. Not about the project or her work, but about her life, the years she spent building everything alone, the choices she made, the relationships she walked away from. Her voice trembled at times, but she never looked away. "I've gotten used to being the person people lean on," she said quietly. "But some days, I just wish someone would stand beside me instead." I didn't know what to say. My chest tightened, not from pity, but from something deeper, an ache that came from realizing how much she'd carried in silence. Without thinking, I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. She didn't pull away. Her hand was warm, slightly trembling. Her eyes flicked to mine, uncertain, searching. For a heartbeat, I thought she might move her hand, remind me where the line was. But she didn't. Instead, she let out a slow breath, one that sounded almost like relief. "Thank you," she whispered. That single word carried so much, gratitude, weariness, maybe even longing. And in that instant, I knew something had shifted between us. The air felt different, charged, fragile, dangerous. We didn't say anything after that. We just sat there, hands still touching, letting the rain fill the room with its steady rhythm. When she finally stood to leave, she lingered by the door for a moment. "You should go home," she said softly, her voice steadier now. "And, thank you for staying." I watched her walk away, the echo of her footsteps mixing with the rain. My hand still tingled where she'd touched it. I knew I'd crossed a line, not one of words or rules, but of emotion. A quiet, invisible line that once crossed, can't be uncrossed. And yet, for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I just felt, closer, after that night, something subtle but undeniable changed between us. We didn't talk about it. We didn't have to. It lived in the pauses between our words, in the way our eyes met and looked away too quickly, in the small moments that suddenly felt too charged to be casual. But the world notices what the heart tries to hide. It started with glances, curious, knowing ones from people around us. The teasing remarks, the soft jokes that weren't really jokes. "You and Mara seem close these days," someone said one afternoon, half smiling. I laughed it off, pretending it didn't land, but inside, my pulse jumped. Mara noticed too. She became careful, too careful. The warmth in her voice thinned around others. The moments we once shared naturally now felt rehearsed, controlled. When we worked side by side, she made sure there was always space between us. When she looked at me, it was brief, like she was reminding herself not to linger. At first, I told myself it was fine. That I understood. She had more to lose than I did, her reputation, her standing, the quiet respect people had for her. But as the days passed, the distance began to sting. There were times when I'd catch her watching me, those fleeting, unguarded seconds before she looked away. Her expression would soften, almost apologetic. And in those moments, I knew the space she was creating wasn't because she felt less. It was because she felt too much. One afternoon, after a particularly tense meeting, I found her alone in her office. The light from the window fell across her face, catching the faint worry lines on her forehead. I closed the door behind me and said quietly, "You've been avoiding me." She didn't deny it. She just sighed, looking out at the gray sky. "People talk," she said. "And they always will. You don't need that kind of attention." I took a step closer. "Neither do you. But it's not fair that we both have to pretend nothing's there." Her gaze finally met mine, full of conflict. "You're young," she said softly. "You don't understand how quickly admiration can turn into judgment. They won't see this for what it is. They'll turn it into something it's not." There was so much she wasn't saying, but I heard it anyway, the fear, the guilt, the tenderness she was trying to bury. I wanted to tell her I didn't care what people thought. That what I felt wasn't some impulsive fascination. But looking at her then, the tension in her shoulders, the tired steadiness in her voice, I realized how much this cost her. So I just nodded and said, "If distance is what you need, I'll give it." She smiled sadly, as if both grateful and heartbroken. "It's not what I want," she whispered. "It's what makes sense." When I left her office, the space between us felt heavier than ever. And yet, beneath the ache, there was something else, something almost comforting. Because even when she pulled away, I knew she was only doing it to protect what already mattered too much. And somehow, that made me love her more. It was late, long after the last light in the building should have gone out. The storm outside had rolled in fast, bringing wind and thunder that rattled the windows. I was still there, finishing reports I didn't need to finish, maybe hoping she'd still be there too. She was. Her office door was half open, the soft glow of a desk lamp spilling into the hallway. She sat by the window, her posture slumped, her phone pressed against her forehead as if the weight of the conversation she'd just had was too much to hold upright. "Mara?" I said softly. She looked up, startled at first, then tired. The kind of tired that went beyond sleep, like she'd been holding herself together for too long. "You're still here?" she asked, her voice low, frayed at the edges. "I could ask you the same," I said. She gave a small laugh, but it broke halfway. Then she sighed, set her phone down, and stared out the window again. Rain streaked the glass behind her, each drop catching light from the street lamp outside. The room felt smaller than usual, the air heavier. Without a word, I crossed the room and sat beside her. Not too close, just close enough to let her know I wasn't leaving. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the storm and her uneven breaths. Finally, she said, "I'm so tired of being strong all the time." It wasn't a confession meant for me, it was something she needed to say out loud. Still, hearing it cracked something open inside me. I turned toward her. "You don't have to be. Not right now." Her lips trembled into a faint smile, but her eyes filled instead. "You say that like it's easy." And then she broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. Her shoulders shaking, her hand covering her mouth as if to keep the sound in. Instinct took over. I reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned forward until her forehead rested against my shoulder. "I hate crying," she murmured, voice muffled. "Then don't," I whispered. "Just breathe." We stayed like that for a long time, no words, no explanations. I could feel her heartbeat against my chest, the faint tremor of her fingers against mine. Every few seconds, she'd exhale deeply, as if releasing years of unspoken weight. When she finally sat back, her eyes were red, but softer. There was no embarrassment, no distance. Just quiet honesty. "You always show up," she said. "Even when you shouldn't." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I don't know when to leave." She looked at me then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between us, an acknowledgement of everything we hadn't said but always felt. Her hand lingered in mine for a moment longer before she whispered, "Thank you, for seeing me." The storm outside began to fade, but inside, the silence was full, gentle, intimate, complete. That night, she didn't ask me to leave. I didn't cross another line. I didn't need to. The walls she'd built around herself had finally fallen, and in their place was something far more fragile: trust. And that was enough. It's strange how love doesn't announce itself. There's no defining moment, no trumpet of realization, just a quiet shift. One day, you wake up and realize that the person who used to be part of your days has quietly become the reason you look forward to them. That's what happened with Mara. Weeks passed since that night in her office. Something unspoken settled between us, not awkwardness, but understanding. She didn't retreat again, and I didn't press for more. We found a rhythm, one built on small gestures and quiet familiarity. A shared coffee in the mornings. A glance across the room that lingered half a second too long. A conversation that always drifted deeper than we intended. The whispers around us hadn't stopped, but neither of us seemed to care anymore. The tension that once frightened her had softened into something gentler, something that existed only for us. When she laughed now, it came easier. When she spoke to me, her voice carried warmth instead of hesitation. One evening, as we packed up after another long day, she looked at me and said, "You've changed how I see myself." I didn't know what she meant at first, but she continued before I could ask. "I'd started to believe that parts of me, my softness, my hope, belonged to a past version of myself. You reminded me they still exist." I didn't say anything. I just smiled and reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was small, innocent, yet it carried everything I couldn't put into words. That was the moment I realized, love had already arrived. Not the kind that burns fast and bright, but the kind that grows quietly, like ivy finding its way up a wall. I hadn't planned it. I hadn't even dared to imagine it. But it was there, steady and real. We started spending weekends together, not in secret, just away from the noise. Long walks by the river, coffee shops tucked in quiet corners of the city, hours spent talking about everything and nothing. She told me stories of her youth, her dreams, her mistakes. I told her about mine. Somewhere between those talks, the years between us stopped feeling like a distance and started feeling like a bridge. One Sunday morning, we sat on her porch watching the sunlight cut through the trees. She rested her hand over mine and said softly, "You know this isn't what either of us expected." "I know," I said. "But maybe the best things never are." She smiled then, genuine, unguarded, and leaned her head against my shoulder. The world felt still, like it was giving us permission to just be. I didn't plan to love her. I didn't plan for her laughter to echo in my thoughts, or for her strength to teach me what gentleness truly means. But love doesn't follow plans, it follows presence. And as I watched the sunlight trace across her face, I knew one thing for certain: I hadn't fallen for her because she was strong. I'd fallen because, in her strength, she'd taught me how to love with my whole heart. That's the thing about her, Mara never asked to be loved. She simply was, and somehow, that became everything.